Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. We have 15, 20 minutes to present some insight from an upcoming publication that we, Professor Melanie Dulong and myself, submitted a few months ago. The publication deals with the Open Data Commons licenses, licensing personal and non-personal data in order to support the commons and privacy. I'm an IP and privacy law professor at the University of Geneva, so that my angle will be more from a private law standpoint. So in this publication, we explored the collective dimension of data, in particular, how to extend open licensing models to all kinds of data, including technical and personal data, so as to ensure a data sharing and a better control over the data, which shall be combined with collective governance of data so as to ensure its implementation and enforcement. So we propose a real template, open data common licenses template, that shall be combined with a compulsory and optional elements, which instead of full openness, allows for restrictions outside of certain boundaries, for instance, outside of certain authorized users or end users, in order to protect the commons and certain values. So in one chapter, we dedicated, we dealt with the template of this license. In a second part, we dealt with this collective management of data through data trusts. And in a third part, we also dealt with the level of openness, in particular, how to address some restrictions to protect the commons and privacy. So you have here the table of content. As you can see, there are different parts that deal with all these aspects. The starting point of this is that data sharing is central in a connected society, but may be subject to multiple rights, multiple actors. Think of a self-driving cars that generate billions of data, many of them being subject to different legal regimes and control rights, from the car producer to car owner, driver, service provider, insurer, and all of them can hinder data sharing. And open licenses, understood as standardized licenses according to which the creator, be it image creator, software creator, or the data subject of personal information, can grant an authorization to use the licensed object to any users willing to abide by the contract. And these standard licenses are traditionally used for copyrighted works, for instance, images or softwares. And their benefit is obvious for AI in particular, because they lower the transaction costs by reducing the need to develop and read complicated terms. And everyone can use, innovate, and enrich, improve existing tools. Think of open source software that are used by anyone, any developers, to create, enrich, or patch pre-existing artificial intelligence. Think of open images used by Wikipedia or Deep Dream to generate a Google Dream image. But generally, these open standardized licenses exclude personal data. They also exclude technical data, yet personal and technical data are everywhere. Think of urban or map data used for smart cities, such as OpenStreetMaps or Google Maps. Think of CAPTCHA data, these small verification programs used by websites to confirm that we are not robots. All of them, they include not only copyrighted data, but also personal and technical data. So it seems interesting to propose open licensing schemes, open licensing models that apply to all of them, be it copyrighted data or personal and technical data. Also, as a starting point, we realized that there are multiple licenses that may apply for a single model, for instance, in the AI value chain. This raises the question of license compatibility. Think of this simple chart of an AI model. As you can see, on the left-hand side, we have different sources of data. Many of them be it under Creative Commons, for instance, other under the MIT open licenses, and other be it under ad hoc specific proprietary licenses. So this raises the question of compatibility. Another issue and another starting point is also that many of them, think of this simple chart of an AI model, can have a lack of copyrightability of certain elements. Obviously, on the left-hand side, if many of the data can be protected via copyright, if it's an image or a conversation which is original enough. However, many other elements, such as the learning algorithm or the weighting factors, many of them can be non-copyrightable, which raises the question also of how to address the contractualization of this non-copyrightable element. So our objectives with our model is to develop an open licensing scheme that applies to all kinds of data, including personal and technical data, including mixed data sets subject to different multiple legal regimes, via our template open data common licenses that combines compulsory and optional elements. And this shall be also combined with collective governance instrument, in particular data trusts, that we suggest also to get inspired by the copyright Centennial Collective Management Societies, the CMO, for the copyright management organizations. Now, I will briefly mention how to extend our model to all the different kinds of data, starting with copyrighted data. Our license intends to extend to all copyrighted data, including what we call AI data. For instance, we think that our license can also help propagating their terms, their open terms, to all derivative data. For instance, all the AI output or all the derivative data coming from an AI model. There are, however, some limits of our license and limits to any kind of open licensing models related to moral rights, because most jurisdictions, or at least in Europe, they recognize moral rights in copyright, and therefore we consider and we suggest to include an unwaivable, irrevocable right to opt out, which is necessary, at least in these jurisdictions that recognize the unwaivable moral rights. Now, briefly about the second types of data that applies also to our licensing scheme is the personal data. We suggest to extend our model to personal data. The rationale is that copyright and personal data are very similar in many, they have many commonalities. For instance, both are subjective, absolute subjective rights. Both are subject to massive exploitation, and both can be also dealt with a data trust or collective management organizations. Similarly as copyright, they are also subject to limits, in particular related to the consent validity, and therefore we also suggest to have a possibility to opt out also from the licensing scheme. Finally, with respect to the third type of data, technical data, we suggest also to extend our scheme to technical data. The rationale, as mentioned before, is that there are technical data also everywhere. I've mentioned the CAPTCHA data or the Google Maps data. Think also of industry or machine-generated data. Many of them can be also just simple technical data with no IP or personal data protection. These technical data can be protected differently in different jurisdictions. In some jurisdictions, such as in the EU, there may be subject to an exclusive right via, for instance, the sui generis database right. And in most jurisdictions, or even in the EU, when the data subjective right does not apply, technical data are theoretically subject to no exclusive protection. But nevertheless, we suggest and consider that contracts may extend to technical data, in particular if we rely on the Ryanair Court of Justice decision that recognized the possibility to restrict and dictate how technical data can be used, even towards third parties that are not bound by the contract via general terms and conditions. And therefore, we suggest to also extend our open licensing scheme based on this case law of Ryanair to also technical data. Last but not least, now I have mentioned to what extent our open licensing scheme can extend to these three types of data: copyrighted data, personal data, and technical data. Now, I will mention briefly the need to combine our open licensing scheme with collective management organization, in particular through data trusts, in order to promote and enforce such an open licensing scheme. To do so, we suggest to rely on the so-called data trust or data trust-like institutions in civil law jurisdictions, for instance, via contractual schemes, in order to have extensive right to represent the data subjects or the other right holders. Data trusts can take different forms, but we also suggest to rely on or to draw inspiration from the copyright collective societies, in particular the CMOs, collective management organizations, because they have many commonalities with privacy protection and with data trusts that many experts rely on, and also because there are many lessons learned from pre-existing projects of CMOs that we think it can be a very, very long, extensive experience to rely on. Here, just a chart to show how it should work. We suggest to set up CMOs per sector, for instance, for music, for social media, or for health, in order to build ecosystematically an ecosystem of commons and also some communities relating to music, social media, health, and other sectors. So first of all, we need to set up these CMOs per sector. And then there is a need to have either a real stewardship, if it's a data trust, or at least a proxy mandate, a mandate towards the data trust, in order them to make and implement the open licensing scheme. In terms of methodology, how to implement and how to ensure scalability, the CMO or the data trust would make mass access requests towards service providers in order to retrieve the data and then to give them back, but imposing the open licensing scheme. So via these mass access requests, they can impose and leverage the open licensing scheme towards users. And this can help building some communities per sector, and finally enhance and enforce the open licensing scheme. Now I'm happy to turn to my colleague, Professor Melanie Dulong, who will explain the notion of openness and to what extent our template can provide granularity in the level of openness. Melanie, you have the floor.
Thank you. So a solution in order to achieve our objectives is to change the traditional paradigm of open licenses and the definition of openness. The purpose is to address personal data and thus protect privacy, but also to counterbalance some of the risks of appropriation of the data commons, which were a side effect of the open licensing existing schemes. So therefore, in the model, we propose to restrict openness. We propose restrictions which are related to privacy, where licensor and licensees will promise to respect a certain level of data protection through a privacy pledge. We also propose a licensor to restrict the authorized users and authorized uses of their data which has the purpose to protect the commons. And the data trusts, collective management organization, have the purpose also to ensure a dialogue in order to ensure compatibility among the licenses. Next slide, please. So currently, we are leading consultations with many communities in order to design the restrictions, the conditions which are needed. And we are collaborating with the Open Knowledge Foundation in order to publish these licenses. So the purpose to discuss with the communities is to identify any possible gaps and also to develop options and clauses to suit their needs. Further on, there will be a technical work to design an interface and interoperate with technical standards and develop all the data trust infrastructure which Yaniv previously described. Next slide, please. So in the template, we have a classic clause of open licenses and also some elements which are optionals in order to accommodate the community's needs, and some options which are compulsory to reflect our values and the need for privacy and data protection. Next. So here is the template with options at the bottom which are compulsory to respect privacy, and at the top other conditions which will restrict or enlarge the scope. For instance, condition 4 of authorized user and uses, and condition 5 make more or less open and closed data commons with the possibility to collect fees through the data trust, which would sustain data commons infrastructure or communities. Next. So we hope you will read the paper and also address us your comments either during the panel discussion or later by email. Thank you.
Thank you very much on my side as well. And we look forward to the discussion during the data for policy. And we hope that you will enjoy our paper indeed. Bye-bye.